You're listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production. And so what you have now is Squaring the Ashlar with Coach Nagy, and so we'll go ahead and proceed. And as you can see in the pictures, we're moving from a rough ashlar to a common ashlar to a perfect ashlar. And for those of you who don't know what a common ashlar is, the moment that you take tool to a rough ashlar with the idea of perfecting it, becomes a common ashlar at that moment. And when it is finally at the perfected state, and we'll get into what that looks like later on, it is then called a perfect ashlar. So these are the three stages that the ashlar goes through in the perfecting process. So let's talk about the ashlar a little bit. An ashlar, in terms of our fraternity, is that which must be informed. And it refers to the person, the operational self. And I particularly reference the operational self because it's not a speculative self. It is an actual realized improvement on how the individual self operates internally and externally with the world. And so if you keep this definition in mind when we're talking about squaring the ashlar, it'll keep everything on track with what it is I'm trying to communicate with everybody listening. So let's talk about squaring. The interesting thing about squaring is equivalent to the perfecting process, but it's an aspect of the perfecting process that is very specific. The word perfect literally does not mean flawless, which is a term that has been adopted from the mid 20th century on. A lot of people use the word perfect to mean, oh, that's flawless, but it did not always mean that, particularly prior to the 1950s. It means to improve, mature, inform, and to make suitable. And this is the 1800s definition that was applied to the word when used within ritual form. It also means suitable for the builder's use. To perfect is to make suitable. And we loosely refer to the term to square to talk about the perfecting process. And if you want to know more about this, I will share this link later on in the chat. But this is the link to a quick overview of this word perfect, should you be interested. So yes, we got a twofer. You got today's presentation plus an additional 3 or 4 minute presentation on the word perfect that expands on what it is that I've shared here. Now, to square refers to the square of virtue, which you first saw when you opened your eyes in the first degree, when you beheld the three great lights. One of them was the square, referred to as the square of virtue in many different jurisdictions. And it is purposely referred to as a square of virtue because of the following. When we look at the word virtue, we're talking about from the root of the word vir, which means manly strength. And manly strength is also referred to in Hebrew as Boaz. So literally when you're building strength, you're building Boaz. Now, the virtues that we talk about in the first degree are cardinal and theological. So let's go ahead and break them up. The cardinal is temperance, prudence, fortitude, and justice. And I like to remember the acronym by just for tempering prudence. And that's the word phrase that I use to remember the cardinal virtues, just for tempering prudence. The theological are faith, hope, and we in the craft refer to charity, but it's actually agape. And the best understanding of the word charity in the relationship to agape is love, unconditional godly love. Now, to square is a term that refers to strengthening. And it is also in the strengthening to remove any and all excess, anything that is unnecessary, anything that is superfluous. And that means you must divest any kind of burdens that you might have. And burdens are those things that are excessive, unnecessary, and superfluous when talking about squaring. Now, the act of squaring is to properly prepare or inform males. It makes males more suitable. And the biggie is that it brings males to healthy male maturity. This is the act of squaring, and this is the ideal that we are supposed to be shooting for when we move from youth to manhood, or from the first degree work to the second degree work. How is this done? That's a good question to ask. Part one of that is to divest yourselves of all superfluities. Now, you're probably saying, well, what about the vices? And that's a good question to ask, because if you're divesting yourself of superfluities, you're divesting yourself of thoughts, feelings, manners, habits, behaviors, activities that are unnecessary, excessive, and burdening, that are unnecessary. Also, relationships with people, your faith, any aspects of faith, philosophies, religion, and beliefs. These are superfluities when they're excessive or unnecessary. And last but not least, we divest ourselves of property, money, and investments that are excessive, unnecessary, and really burdensome to what it is that we are attempting to do with our lives. Now, back to, why did I just use the word superfluities and not vice? And that's a great question to ask, because superfluities are anything that is unnecessary and anything that is excessive, whereas vices, they are harmful, unnecessary, and excessive things. And you'll notice that there's an equity between the two, with the only addition of harmful, which basically means that a vice is simply a harmful superfluity. And this is one of the things that we have to remember when we refer to vices and superfluities. We're talking about things that are unnecessary and excessive, even when they're harmful or not. It makes no difference. So what happens here is we understand, using a Venn diagram, that vices are a subset of superfluities, and we keep this in mind. So when I refer to superfluities, I'm also referring to vices, those superfluities that are harmful. So part two of how we do this is we infuse with virtues. Now, I went back to the cardinal and theological. The infusion of cardinal and theological virtues happens in the divestment process. In the craft, we use a tool called the common gavel. And the common gavel is supposed to be directed toward those things that are unnecessary and those things that are excessive. And with every directed blow of the common gavel, we are to divest ourselves of those superfluities. You cannot direct any specific blow to divest without investing a virtue or virtues. So in looking at these virtues, there is at least one or a few of these virtues being applied every time there's a divestment of a superfluity going on. And that's how those two tie together. Now, the path or the method that we go about in infusing and divesting is taking that common gavel, using virtue to direct each blow, to divest any unnecessary aspects. We call them superfluities. And while we're doing that, we're strengthening ourselves through the investment of those virtues, which direct every blow to divest. And we're literally building Boaz. And that's what it takes to square an Ashlar. And the results that you should see at the end of the squaring process is you have a mature, healthy, masculine male who is an adult and ready to now tackle adult things. Thank you. You've been listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Beep, beep.